Give it up for Claudine Gay, ladies and gentlemen. And please, give it up to Tommy Shelby, not only for his great leadership, but that remarkable history of the evolution of African and African American studies over the last 50 years. I'm going to speak about one person. We have to give credit where credit's due, and my privilege today is to give this person credit. But before I do, I just want you to, Tommy mentioned the fact that two of our predecessors, the original predecessors, were here with us, Orlando Patterson and Ephraim Isaac. Orlando Patterson, of course, is one of the greatest sociologists of the 20th and now the 21st century, and Ephraim Isaac introduced the idea of teaching African languages within a department of African American Studies. And now, under the leadership of John Mugani, we have the largest African language program in the world, larger than SOAS, which was what my goal was. I went to Cambridge, so SOAS was always like a monkey on our back, right? And I said, we got to beat them. I want Orlando and Ephraim Isaac to stand up. Please give it up. Please give it up to the pioneers. Much has been made, many kind things about the transformation of the department that was wrought in 1991 and throughout the 90s. The recruitment of Kwame Anthony Appiah, Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham. Evelyn can't be here. She has a flu. It's horrible. I hope she's watching. Somebody call Evelyn home, show her how to get her computer on and how to watch this. And Evelyn, I hope you're watching. I'm cracking on you because I love you so much. William Joyce Wilson, Cornell West, and then, of course, Larry Bobo and Marcy Morgan and the rest of our great community. I always envied. I started at Yale in 1969 when Afro-American Studies started at Yale and at Harvard. I didn't major in Afro-American Studies. I majored in history, but I took a Black Studies course every semester, and I was just drawn to the field, to African and African-American Studies, and I took a year off on a Yale program called 5-year BA and spent a year in Africa, in Tanzania, working in the bush and learned Swahili. My vocabulary, Claudine, is inordinately populated with words like wehele, which means breathe deeply, because I was working at a mission hospital. and then I came back, and I envied the pioneers in African and African American studies. And then, as fate would have it, in 1991, I got an opportunity to come and basically start over. It was one person here who warmly welcomed us, and that was the great scholar Werner Solers. We had 6 unfilled FTEs. I could do math. 2 times 6 is 12 if we had joint appointments. And we were off. But it wasn't because of anything unique about me. It was because of the support of 2 people in this room for what Anthony and I dreamed about doing. And without their support, we wouldn't be here. And those 2 people, or the person who hired me, was the dean in his last year, Henry Bosowski. And my appointment was announced on February 1st, 1991, and shortly after that, Derek Bach's successor was announced, and that was Neil Rudenstein. Neil Rudenstein invited me to the Mellon Foundation, where he was vice president. And he said, I'm inviting you here because I believe in the centrality of Afro-American studies to a liberal arts education. And he handed me a legal pad. And he said, I want you just to fantasize. How could we go about recruiting the best people, in your opinion, in the field? And I looked at him. He said, make a list of the people if you could hire. If you could hire anybody you want, make a list of who you would hire. I wrote out a list of names. I still have that legal pad, and almost all of the people on that legal pad are in this room today. Without Henry Wysowski teaching me every week, he flew me up from Duke, where I was miserable. He flew me up from Duke every 2 weeks before my appointment started and gave me tutorials about the sociology and the culture of Harvard University, about how to be a good chair. I had never been a chair before. I used to ask him, this is my goal, how do I achieve that goal? He would set up lunches for me, dinners for me, just to, so as Peter Gomes put it, and we're all, of course, in the house of Peter Gomes, and his spirit is very much with us. Peter Gomes said, by Wysowski bringing you to Harvard every 2 weeks before your appointment started, you were able to tell your own story before it was told about you. And Cornell, I never forgot that. It let people get to know me, like to share the vision, instead of the press creating an image of me, which I then had to live down. So without Henry Wysowski and without Neil Rudenstein, there would be no African American Studies department as we know it today. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank God for these two men every day of my life, and that's not an exaggeration. Please give it up for Henry Wysowski and Neil. Please stand up. Henry, Neil. Thank you. Now I want to say a few words about Claudine's predecessor, Dean Mike Smith. I remember when Mike Smith was named the dean back in July 2007. By this time, I had finally stepped down as chair after 15 years. I was beginning to have a Mobutu complex, and my friend Cornell said, Mobutu been in office a long time, brother. And I took the hint. Evelyn said, if you step down, we'll have your portrait painted. I said, that's a pretty good deal. And then dear Evelyn took over, and Evelyn's a fabulous chair, and after Evelyn, Larry Bobo. They were greater chairs than I just planted the seeds. And now Tommy is at the helm, and as you can see, what a great leader Tommy is. And by this time, I was the director of the Hutchins Center. The Hutchins Center is comprised of 11 subunits, and one of which is the DuBois Institute. The Hutchins Center is a building as well as a concept. And so I was the founding director of the Hutchins Center. And like any good center director at Harvard, I did as much preliminary research about this new guy. For those of you who don't know, he was writing the checks, so he was a good person to study. But somehow, despite the fact I'd been here since 1991, I had never met Mike Smith before. So I boned up in advance of our first meeting. Who was he? Where had he studied? What was his area of expertise? Most importantly for us, what was his take on diversity? You all know the drill. We call it Dean 101, right, Cornell? And I was heading for my first exam with this brother. A bit nervous because all I could find out was that he was an expert in electrical engineering, he was a distinguished computer scientist, and he was one of the country's leading specialists in high-performance computer architecture, about which I knew absolutely nothing. He was also a master of various computer languages. His interests, in other words, were not exactly my strong point. I also learned that he was eager for department chairs and center directors to offer voluntarily to make cuts in their budgets. And that was a language, ladies and gentlemen, that I didn't speak at all. But I did learn that he was an expert in something called dynamic optimization. And that was an interest we definitely shared. But I had a feeling that what he meant by dynamic optimization and what I meant by dynamic optimization might not exactly be the same thing. But what the hell, I thought, it was time to take the plunge. Now, I didn't realize the word plunge would be more relevant to this brother than I had imagined. Somehow, along the way in our first meeting, as we danced around each other, I asked him about his hobbies. And he told me that his favorite sport and favorite hobby was swimming, at which he had excelled as an undergraduate at Princeton, and that he swam religiously every day, in fact, every morning at 5 a.m. At 5 a.m., about the time I was turning over for my last 3 or 4 hours of sleep. Damn, I thought, this guy is a machine. That's where those broad shoulders come from, I thought. Maybe I could try that, I reflected to myself. Then I remembered it was 5 a.m. I said, no way. That's not going to happen. That is too early, and that water is too cold. So I reported on our first meeting to my friend, the chair of the department, Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham, and I told her that the one thing I knew about this dude was that he was a physical fitness nut and that he plunged into the icy cold water at the gym every morning before sunup to do laps for an hour. This guy is serious, I told Evelyn, and working with him is going to be hard work. Well, to make a long story short, that meeting was the beginning of what became, over the next 11 years, an unparalleled, extraordinarily productive, historic period in Harvard's long effort to recruit and promote faculty of color. The renowned educational leader and civil engineer, a man named James Kip Finch, who was the late dean of Columbia University's School of Engineering and Applied Science, famously said, and I quote, "The engineer has been and is a maker of history, not because he felt coerced to do this, but because he believed in doing this. Mike Smith believed that diversity with excellence was a value in itself, a hallmark of any great institution of higher learning that fancied itself a beacon of truth and light in a 21st century cosmopolitan world civilization, and a model of cultural diversity at its most sublime. By my count, Mike tenured, promoted, and hired during his all too brief 11-year tenure as the Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, 19 African American and Native American faculty into senior faculty positions. And those on that list appointed with voting rights in the Department of African and African American Studies include Lawrence Douglas Bobo, now the Dean of the Social Sciences, Marcelina Morgan, the Dean and the Queen of Hip Hop at Harvard, Vincent Brown, Glenda Carpio, Marla Frederick, Robert Reed Farr, Taya Miles, Jamaica Kincaid, Cornell West, and Teju Cole. Mike also had the honor of appointing Harvard's very first female university professor of color, the brilliant political theorist and the director of the Safra Center for Ethics, Danielle Allen. There were still more people of color whom Mike appointed at the junior level, 11 to be exact, including our own Brandon Terry, Elizabeth Hinton, Sarah Elizabeth Lewis, Jesse McCarthy, Braxton Shelley, and Ellis Monk. And most important of all, Mike had the good sense and the wise judgment to appoint the Wilbert A. Cowett Professor of Government and AAAS, Claudine Gay, as the Dean of the Social Sciences in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. I suspect that Mike knew full well that Claudine one day would be a superb successor to him as the Edgerly Family Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. To circle back to what Columbia's Dean Finch wisely said way back in 1960, engineers do make history, but I'll add, in Mike's case, engineers also make culture, because it was Mike Smith's decision, and his alone, to create the Cooper Gallery of African and African American art. We are the only major department of African and African American studies with our own gallery for the collection an exhibition of African and African American art. Give it up for that brother for that decision. Mike, you made history at Harvard not by talking the talk of diversity and multiculturalism, but by walking the walk of diversity with excellence. And you did so in an unparalleled manner. Harvard forever will be indebted to you for this signal achievement, along with so many other noble things that you accomplished during your tenure as dean. And let me add a final word about all that swimming that Mike was doing at dawn, when sensible people are still holding on to the blissful last few hours of deep and restful sleep. One day, Mike called me and says that he has something important to share, something he'd like kept confidential for the time being. I said, sure, Mike. I held my breath. I always hold my breath when the dean calls. Mike said he'd fallen in love and he was going to get married. And he asked me, would I come to the wedding? She's lovely, he said, and her name is Christina. I was deeply touched, and I was delighted. I said, congratulations, my man. I'm so very happy for you. Then it occurred to me, Mike worked so hard. He was in his office 12, 14 hours a day, burning the proverbial candle on both ends. So I wanted to know when he had found the time to meet and court a brilliant, beautiful woman like Christina. So I asked him, Mike, how did you meet? Where did you meet? Oh, he said, that's easy. We met at the swimming pool. We met every morning at 5 a.m. I never missed a day. Seduction with goggles. That was a new one to me. Turned out that all my theories about Mike's devotion to health and physical fitness were total rubbish. You got to watch those engineers, ladies and gentlemen. Mike, thank you for being a great leader of our endlessly mischievous and endlessly talented faculty. Thank you for showing the country, indeed for showing the world, how to diversify the Academy's most talented faculty with equally stellar faculty of color. And thanks, finally and ultimately, for being my friend. For your years of support for diversity with excellence at Harvard. It is now my honor, on behalf of the faculty of the Department of African and African American Studies, along with my colleague, the chair, Tommy Shelby, to present to you Harvard's highest honor for achievement in African and African American Studies, the William Edward Burghardt DuBois Medal. Please join me.